Hello, and welcome to another episode of, what is this called? A Heart Full of History. I'm Selene Castrovilla, and I'm here with the lovely and very amusing Sarah Albee. Thank you for joining me, Sarah. This is going to be a lot of fun. Sarah and I know each other. You know, we've done presentations together, and we've had some fun together. And I know this is going to be a great episode right off the bat. And the reason why I chose today to speak with Sarah is because it's February, it's President's Month, and we both have books about everyone's favorite president. He should be anyway. We wouldn't have any other presidents without this president. Sarah, tell us about your book.
Okay, well, my book is called The Painter and the President, with a subtitle, Gilbert Stuart's, I don't want to get it wrong, Gilbert Stuart's Brush with George Washington. By the way, I guess we're not bleeping out errors because I screwed up from the second we started.
I probably won't. I thought that was funny, so I'll probably leave it. I am capable of editing, but I kind of think it's funny to have, humanity.
Yeah, good. So this was illustrated by Stacy Innerst, who is a genius. And
yes, absolutely.
I love the way and we can talk about this more, but he embedded actual Gilbert Stuart paintings into his own artwork, and their styles, Gilbert's and Stacy's, I think just complement one another brilliantly. So
yeah, absolutely.
So
it really is amazing. We'll look at some of the other pages after, because wow, he was brilliant the way and even I know you wrote the title, but the brush with his brush with the brush.
Stacy came up with that.
Oh my God! Oh, I love that.
Came up with a subtitle, and our editor did not want to repeat painter or president.
Right. Yeah.
And so that was Stacy's suggestion.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, I love it. I love it. But I just love everything. It's so whimsical. You could see he had a really good time illustrating it. And ditto with my illustrator. This is my latest book, George
cover.
Thank you. George Washington's Spectacular Spectacles, The Glasses That Saved America. My illustrator, Jen Harney, also, I can't imagine it with any other illustrator. She's so perfect for it. It's so whimsical, and I can't imagine how she came up with this stuff. It's amazing how illustrators do this. Well, artists, they really, I was talking to E.B. Lewis last week, and he likes to be called, I forgot what he said, but he calls himself an artistrator on his website. But basically, an artist, illustrator is a lovely word, but these people they're artists worthy of any museum, in my opinion. I think they're amazing.
Oh, 100%. I do. It is a question I like to ask kids when I do school visits is, what is the difference between an artist and an illustrator?
Oh, yeah?
And do you want to hazard a guess?
No.
Well, I don't know if this definition holds in illustration schools, or I'd love to ask an illustrator or an artist, but illustrators are artists, and many illustrators are also fine artists, and vice versa. But I think an illustration tells a story, and whether it's the cover of a book, it has to do what this book is about, and or it has to work with text to tell a story. Or not. There are brilliant picture books without text, but I think illustrations because they tell a story.
Yeah, I get a little vexed by those picture books without words. I'm like, excuse me, you have to put me completely out of business.
If it's not.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. If you think about it, all paintings do tell a story, but they're telling the story the specific story that we've written, and then they're adding the other level to it. That must be quite a challenge.
Yeah. And also you're doing sometimes 24 separate paintings, and everybody has the same from one page to the next.
Oh, I know.
But illustrators also illustrate advertisements, and they're to sell something. It is definitely a message. And I would push back about fine art having to tell a story. Some of it does, for sure.
But, really?
If you ask an abstract expressionist, well, what's that painting about? I don't think you're supposed to ask that.
I think that, well, it's kind of like what I say about my writing. I don't want to tell people what to think about my writing. I wanted to tell the story that they want to hear. So I think every book and every painting, every illustration is finished in the minds of whoever is looking at it and reading it, because they're the completion. It's like a circle, and they complete the circle. That's what's great about art and literature, all these things, because you get an input into it. Like, when you watch TV, it's very passive, right? You're sort of being told I mean, you could think about it, but mostly it's like to veg out, right? You want to veg out when you watch TV, but books, art, they make you wake up. You have to think about them, and that's what I think. My favorite artist is Monet. I love Monet. I've been to his gardens. Oh my God. Going to the gardens is just like the painting. It's amazing. He painted them so long ago, and it's maintained exactly the same. And I just love him because I see a story in those paintings, and you probably wouldn't see the same story because it's all based. We each come at things with our own experiences, our own, and then and in fact, I can look at a painting differently every time I see it because it depends on my mood as well. It doesn't all art doesn't strike me that way. Some art I find like, oh, whatever. But that's my taste, and someone else will fall in love with the other painting and not like Monet. Although some guy was criticizing Monet in the museum once when I was there, Museum of the Met, and he was telling his friends about, and I'm like, excuse me, but this man he goes, oh, he did the same thing so much. Like, he did not. He was using light. He was doing it. Oh, and these people thought I was great, and he looked at me like he wanted to kill me at the end of this. But I couldn't let that go. To me, he's a master. It's like us writing. We work so hard on those sentences, and they'll be like, oh, that's a stupid picture book. You know what I mean? Who needs them? Picture books, as we both know, are the hardest thing to write because it's like a poem. Every single word has to count, Yeah. Well, let's talk about the writing of the book. So how did you come up with the idea for writing this?
Well, I had never heard of Gilbert Stuart as a young person, but come to find out, I was very familiar with him because everyone's seen his work. They just don't know that they've seen it. Right. And I also like to ask kids to ask their grown-ups at home, have you ever heard of Gilbert Stuart? And the honest grown-ups generally will say no. Right. Some people say, but in fact, he was the go-to portrait painter of the late 1700s, early 1800s in Europe, in England and Ireland, and then in America. He was American.
Right.
But I heard of him for the first time. Well, it sort of coalesced in my brain who he was when I had a summer job in Rhode Island in college between my freshman and sophomore year. And I was kind of looking after this elderly couple who had this fabulous summer place on the beach. And I was sort of a jack of all trades for them. But the advertisement was like, young person wanted to help around the house. Violin or piano an asset. So it turns out that he of the couple was, the husband was a pretty accomplished violinist, but also a surgeon. Oh. And so he and I would, I would cook and I would clean and then we would play duets at night. It was forever. But every morning I would go for a run, and I was a pretty serious athlete in those days. And I every morning I jogged past this this historical homestead of Gilbert Stuart. Oh. And I thought, who's that guy? And finally, I kind of looked him up. This is pre-Google. Right. Realized, that guy, he's a painter. And then as soon as you hear his name, you'll see him now. Everyone listening to this are going to know who he is for the rest of their lives because he's everywhere. And he did 6 presidents' portraits. Yes. And including he painted George 3 times. And the iconic one is now known as the Athenaeum portrait. Oh, okay. And I could go on about that. Basically, he didn't finish the Athenaeum portrait. Yeah. I don't understand that. Well, that's what the book is about, actually. I still didn't understand. I know you explained it, but it's psychologically. I mean, I know he didn't do it, but why not? Yeah, because he didn't want to give it to him. I think so. George, this was at the end of George's life. He would die a year or 2 after this. Yeah. But Martha begged George. George hated sitting for portraits. Yeah. I mean, he was a man of action. He didn't, but he knew the importance of art. And that really is I think that is the theme of the book. It takes a while to come to understand what I'm writing, but really it's the power of art. Yes. And so George knew he needed Gilbert, even though they couldn't stand each other. Right. What I love. And Gilbert knew he needed George, or really wanted George, because it would be his ticket to fame. Right. And he was always spending more money than he earned. I can relate to that. And he was very quickly. I mean, I wonder if he might have been diagnosed as bipolar, had that been a diagnosis. Interesting. But he was very prickly, but he was also very proud he thought artists should be treated with esteem and and respect.
Right.
In those days, they were sort of seen as tradesmen. And so she's this guy who was like really, really talented, and he wore pretty expensive clothes because he hung around all these wealthy people, and he kind of aspired. He was a little bit of a climber, I guess we'd say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he sort of aspired to be like them, and he drank expensive Madeira, and he loved snuff, and, you know, his cuffs were always like lacy and stuff. But basically, he did not feel he was treated with the deference that he should be. And George, in turn, believed that, hey, he's the president. He needed to be treated with deference as well.
Right.
And so he thought that Gilbert sort of took liberties, was too jokey and jocular, and didn't sort of respect the gravitas of the presidency. And
yes,
it was the clash.
Yes. So you discovered about Gilbert Stuart after you looked him up. So were you like back then? Were you struck with the idea?
No, sorry, okay. That was your question of 10 minutes ago.
No, this is what we do. Yes.
So now I knew who Gilbert Stuart is, I've sort of encountered him along the way. I studied a lot of art in college and stuff. But it wasn't until I was working. I've written about George Washington a ton.
Yeah.
In various ways, shapes, and forms. I mean, he's got chapters in some of my books. I have a book about dogs and, dog days of history. And there's a thing about presidential pups. And so, George loved dogs, and I have all kinds of stuff. And he just, and I had this, I was working on this second grade I Can Read with HarperCollins, and it was a biography of George Washington, and it looks like you could write it during America's Got Talent. I mean, it's so few words and very controlled vocabulary, but those, as you've just said, those are
hard.
So difficult, because how do you sum up this very complicated man for second graders? I needed to talk about how he was an enslaver, but where to put that, because you don't want to freak out 7-year-olds, but you need them to know. And so the back matter. So it was just a really complicated book. And in researching this, I'm married to a history teacher, and we were the visiting scholars at Mount Vernon for a week.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so I learned a lot. I did a ton of research while I was there, but it wasn't on until I was reading Ron Chernow's biography.
Okay.
Just this 800-page. I should have had it.
That's a heavy one. Yeah.
It's a doorstop. But I read every word of it, and I love his writing. And it was in the intro. It was in not even the intro, like in the preface, like they were little Roman numerals. Like he's talking about George Washington, the man, and I stumbled across a mention of Gilbert Stuart, and I'm like, I know that guy,
right?
And how they couldn't stand each other. And when you come across something and you're reading and it just goes ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
I'm sure that happens to you.
It does. It's the best feeling,
It is.
That's like you've won the lottery,
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish everyone could know that feeling. It's just so great. It is. It's a high.
Picture books either. It's happened to me. I mean, I can remember a lot of moments where I've literally whooped out loud in the library.
Yeah. People think you're crazy, but like, this is the thing. This is why it's just so the thrill of the chase. You've got that thing, and now you're going to go chase it. I just love that.
Yeah. It's the best.
Yeah.
Oh.
Did you start writing it right away?
Yeah. And, it's amazing how some books age you 15 years and take billion drafts. This one, it was one of these, it kind of wrote itself.
Wow.
I mean, let's.
Well, of course, nothing writes itself.
Sure. Did not write it during an episode of America's Got Talent, but it did. It probably took me 10 or 12 drafts before I got it in the order I wanted to tell it, and I wanted it to be funny, but I also wanted, and I wasn't sure what I was writing about until that 12th draft. Like, it's art. That's what it's about,
right?
You sort of have to tell the story to yourself. I think it was Stephen King who said that. The first few drafts are your and then you're telling it to someone else. And that's exactly what happened. I was like, I knew the story, but what is it I'm really talking about? And that was it.
Yeah.
My agent really liked it, and she sent it to our mutual editor, and she acquired it right away. It was incredibly, and Stacy, for all his brilliance, is also a fairly quick artist.
Really? That was quick. Wow. Because it looks like it was taking a long time.
I mean,
Yeah.
again, let's put this into context.
Right. Yeah. He didn't whip it out the next day. Yeah.
No, he did not. And there were and I was a pain in the neck with the sketches. And for our avid listeners out there,
Right.
they may not, I don't know how well they know this, but nonfiction picture book writers do get to see sketches and do get to have input on the sketches because we need it for historical accuracy. Whereas fiction picture book writers really don't.
Right.
I think the really famous ones do. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure I'll be corrected somewhere by someone in some comment somewhere. But I know I have asked. I have talked to. I have a lot of some of my best friends.
Yeah, that's what I've thought. That's what I've heard, that they don't. And it was quite a shock actually when I realized how involved I had to be with the art. Really, my first book was quite. It was quite a learning curve because I had to ask experts to go over it. And I was very timid and I didn't want to ask them and bother them, What I've learned also is that there's no one expert on everything, right? So you always have to go to different experts for different things. It's like, so you sort of have to piece it together. It's a lot, but now it's easy, Now, I mean,
I have to tell you my expert story for this one. I needed someone who knew Gilbert Stuart, but also knew George Washington, but also knew like 18th century painting. And so I looked at the co-authors of this huge, another doorstopper, Metropolitan Museum, Gilbert Stuart retrospective that was many years ago. But I contacted one of them. I don't think she'd mind if I mentioned her name, Ellen Miles. And turns out she is the foremost expert, not only on Gilbert Stuart, but on late 18th, early 19th century American art. Portraiture. And so I meekly I found her email, I emailed her, and I was so nervous about showing her this manuscript. Like, who am I to have written this book? Yeah. And she got back to me and she was pretty formal and we arranged a phone call the first time we talked, and again, she was pretty formal, and I said, okay, I got to tell you, I feel a little bit like I'm talking to Paul McCartney. Yeah. She kind of didn't laugh. And I'm like, God, she doesn't have a sense of humor. This is awful. But then the next time she emailed me, she signed it Best Paul.
Oh, that's good. And so she did have a sense of humor.
And then we became like besties. Like we had this correspondence back and forth. And I found this letter that George had written to Lafayette about, about artists being the doorkeepers at the Temple of Fame. And
I love that. That was a great line. Yeah.
And she was like, where'd you find that? Like, so it was
that's great.
I told you something.
I love that.
But mostly she was just incredibly helpful with helping to shape.
That's great. It really is so important to have the right people. Well, I consulted with people at Mount Vernon in the past.
They're the best.
But they are, but they definitely are. They're so smart. And they're so excited to help because, they love George so much. But my books in the past were very serious books about George Washington. They were like, and then this book is so irreverent, right? George Washington had to get glasses. And I was like, this book is a little different. I was really worried about how they would feel about it. But they seemed okay because I really prepared them for it. I was like, it's not my usual. And but I think it suits the story. Of course, every good story about treason should be written, in a funny manner. But, it all worked out. I will say, writing to the people at Newburgh, Washington's headquarters at Newburgh is where this took place. So I had been up there several times, speaking with them, roaming the area, asking questions. My book's about the Newburgh conspiracy, which is the
e-book littles for our listeners. I read it. I read it at the National Council Institute of English.
Oh yeah,
NCTE, and I read it, in the booth.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, this book is the one that aged me. A lot of my books aged me, but this was not an easy thing. The way it came out now, that was easy once I discovered to do this. But I was trying to write it in my very serious manner. And you had the what did he say about the Temple of Art? How do you call the art?
Are the doorkeepers to the Temple of Fame.
I love that.
It's just a random letter. I mean,
he must love temples because he had created the Temple of Virtue at Newburgh. And that's where he had the men build it. There was so much unrest because there was no more fighting. The war was over, but not over. They were doing all the paperwork, and it was very long and drawn out. So he had the soldiers build the Temple of Virtue to give them something to do. And then it was a place for them to pray and meet and various things. And that's where he confronted his officers had not been paid in years. And they knew that when this war was officially over, they were no longer needed. They were very, very probably never going to get paid. And they had lost everything. They left their homes, they left their businesses, everything was in ruins and they needed money to get their lives back together. They had no money to take care of their families. And there's also something called debtor's prison then. That doesn't sound like fun. Yes. So they had a real problem, but they decided they were kind of pushed into this by a man that everybody seems to love, but he's not my hero, Alexander Hamilton. Okay. He was a Federalist. He wanted to get more power for the federal government, but he tried to get the army. He tried to make them threaten to take over because then he would say, see, I need more money. I need more power for the federal government. He didn't think they were actually going to do it, you know? So they got pushed and they were secretly planning. They were going to do it. They were going to have a meeting and they were going to do it. I think the meeting was actually on the Ides of March, which is so kind of, I love Shakespeare. So, to me, everything always ties together. But Washington, his secret was that he got glasses and he didn't want, they called them spectacles. He didn't want anybody to see them because at the time, it was a sign of frailty to wear glasses. It was not, this was before Benjamin Franklin did the bifocal, and he was vain, and he did not want to see anybody in his glasses. So everybody is like, oh, he seems grouchy, but he was like, slamming the door. He doesn't want anybody because he had needed the glasses every time he had to read something, so he was hiding it.
Well, the toothaches, but
that's right. He had that too. Meanwhile, his men are the ones plotting this thing, and he finds out, and he goes into action, and he gives him this long, impassioned speech, and his speeches usually worked, And they were like, no. I wrote, they wanted Congress to show them the money now. That line from Jerry Moore. It was fun.
You can blame them. Honestly.
No, you can't blame them, but you can blame them for wanting to overthrow the government. That's ridiculous. There's other ways of doing things. That's the wrong way. I'm not fond of overthrowing the government. I don't think it's right. No. I'm not a fan of that.
We are not going there. We are not going there. We are not going there.
No, I'm not going there. But it's kind of funny how that things go around in circles. Like history does repeat itself. So how he gets them to do it is he was reading them a letter from a member of Congress that was promising to pay them, albeit he didn't say when, right? So he had the letter and he said he realized he couldn't read it. And so he had his glasses in his pocket and he put them on and then they were gasping. And he said to them, gentlemen, you must forgive me for having grown gray in your service. I now find myself growing blind. And they burst into tears and they just couldn't, they felt so bad. They immediately saw how much he'd sacrificed for them. And that was it. It was all off just because he put on a pair of glasses. And that's why I always wanted to just write that simple story. But when I started researching, there was the Temple of Virtue, which is where he confronted them too. But it's just, I wanted that to be like another character. I love the Temple of Virtue. Sometimes your ideas take over what the story needs to be, And I was trying to talk about, Alexander Hamilton and the officers' plots more in detail. And then there was Horatio Gates, who always wanted to take over. He probably had crocodile tears at the end. I doubt he really wanted to give up the whole thing. It was getting more and more complicated as I wrote it. And Carolyn was like, I don't know, And we kept working at it because she kept saying, you have to give context. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, this is not for kids or anybody. It's just a mess. So I put it away. I don't know about you, but I don't give up on my manuscripts. I put them away for a while. And I'm really proud to be a member of the Bank Street Writers Lab, Bank Street College of Education. And they are so helpful. They're so helpful, period. But they give you a deadline. I have to have something to read to them, right? At one point, I was like, I don't have anything to read to these guys. Oh, I'll pull the manuscript out of the drawer, the glasses manuscript. And I said, you know what? I'm not even going to look at it. I'm just going to rewrite. And it was all there. So it's like what you said, but it was 10 years later.
No, but sometimes you have to kind of let it.
You got to let it go. Yeah. So it's just, I think the important lesson for writers is we can't get in our own way. We have to let the story be what it needs to be. And that's a hard thing to understand, because we get this in our head, what we want, at least I do.
Yeah. And I also, I have a very complicated relationship with George Washington, as I'm sure many people do. He was, yes, he was a man of time.
I know.
But, he owned 360.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And he was a difficult man in many ways.
He was, yeah.
But I think that because he's such an icon, most people it's just very difficult to get to know him as a person. And my favorite thing to write about, I'm social history is my thing. I think it's fascinating to help kids see, well, what did people do for fun, and what did they eat, and how.
Yeah, you're great at that. Oh my God. So you're so,
when they were sick, or,
Yeah.
they had a toothache or whatever. And
Yeah,
I just loved that this was just, it's sort of humanized
absolutely.
these
Both these books too. Right. And they're both unexpected ways of doing it, you know?
Yeah.
They're not, there's certainly, neither one is a typical book about George Washington in any way, really.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, because
but,
it's been written, and,
yeah,
and
I know.
I just,
It's true.
the idea that like kids are being forced to read books, like, like it's taking medicine or something. I know.
Is that going to help them in any way?
Right.
It's like they'll take a test and then they'll forget it all. That's not what education really should be. It's not effective, and they're not going to become readers, and they're not going to become scholars. They're just going to eat everything.
Yeah.
No, I agree entirely. I mean, if you told me I was going to write about George Washington when I was a kid, I'd be like, you're out of your mind. That guy is friggin' boring. Okay, there's no way I'm ever going to write about this guy. And then I fell in love with him. What was the thing when I fell in love with him? Well, it was at the Battle of Long Island. He saved all his men. He saved all his men by creating a retreat, getting them across the water in one night. I was like, what? How did he do that? And then I found that the first thing I found out was that he was a spy, that he had a spy ring. Yeah. And it was here on Long Island. And no one ever taught us anything about the Revolutionary War in relation to Long Island. And you would think, I think they do now, luckily, but I mean, are you kidding me? Of course you should tell kids about what happened where they live. I mean, it's so exciting. But George Washington came alive to me. And the enslaving thing is really hard. And I used to try to avoid it, but I couldn't avoid it anymore. Well, Lafayette, of course, Lafayette asked him to join him to end slavery, and Washington refused. And that is a real kick in the head. I mean, that's awful, Yeah. It was awful for Lafayette. I have a book about Washington and Lafayette as well. But when I wrote a book for Scholastic about the first lady, not the first ladies, the revolution, the women of the revolution, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't even want to include Martha because I just don't think she was that important. Like, she really was kind of like blah, and of course I had to have her in there. As a matter of fact, Gilbert Stuart's portrait of her was one of the pictures on the cover. And then when I was reading about her, with him, you could sort of avoid it because you think about all the great things he did. With her, there was nothing to think about except the fact that she enslaved people. I'm like, oh God. And it really, really upset me. And I have a really hard time with it. So there's a lot of people that we admire that also have done horrible things, or there's a lot to think about with that. So we present it to the kids and they have to think about it. I guess we can't lie. We can't shield. It doesn't do any good. I think the best thing to do, it's sort of like a painting, present them the information and let them think about it. And, that's another thing. I think our books treat kids with the respect that they deserve. Our books don't talk down to them. They're not haughtily written, but our books tell it like it is. And then it gives room for the kids to think. And I think that's so important,
Yeah.
But I love how you had that George Washington, when he was sitting, all of a sudden his mood changed when he saw a horse. Because I love that.
Well, I mean, he showed up for his sitting, and I think it was like the second one. I mean, Gilbert Stuart was a very fast painter, and people were amazed. He didn't mix his paints on the palette. He would put them next to each other on the canvas.
Wow. Yeah, he did that. You saw that on the pages in the illustration. That was beautiful. I love that. Yeah,
it was amazing. But nevertheless, it did more than one sitting. But what blows my mind is you didn't have to sit there and stare at the person while they're like, "Don't hold still. I got to get your eye."
Right.
And you could walk around the room. You could drink.
That is amazing.
Chat with your friends. I mean, and he could just nail you to the canvas.
That's shocking.
But when George showed up for their sitting, Gilbert Stuart looks at him like, oh my God, what is wrong with his mouth? Yeah. He had just had his new dentures fitted and they fit terribly. And you think about it, I mean, this was even before wax impressions, and he had the best dentists there were. And still, they were like cartoon choppers. Like if you opened your mouth too fast, they'd go flying out, just like in the cartoons. And so they were on a spring and they were ill-fitting, and they, just imagine the chafing and how awful it would have been. Wow. And so George showed up feeling miserable, and he didn't want to sit there with this chatterbox. And Gilbert Stuart's looking at him like, what am I going to do? This guy's mouth is all swollen, and Gilbert Stuart was a realist. I mean, you see there's like powder / dandruff on people's shoulders and painting. But he painted what he saw, but he was trying to think of some way to get George to lighten up, and nothing worked. He tries all these different things. And finally, and this story was recorded by Gilbert Stuart's daughter in her memoirs about her father. It's hard to kind of triangulate the sources because there's so few, but I think we can be reasonably sure that this did happen, that Gilbert looks up and George has been looking out the window and this gorgeous horse is trotted by and his face is all lit up.
Oh.
And so Gilbert's sort of like, yes, we'll talk about horses. And that was a way to sort of draw out, a slightly more cheerful.
Yeah, that was great.
So,
it's so true. It's so true that he loved horses.
Yeah.
And he actually died because he went out riding and then he didn't change his clothes. And, but he had to go riding before, even he had
dinner on the table at a certain time.
So important.
Yeah. Oh, he was a military guy.
So,
he was. Anyway, so that was, but what's really cool is and I got to show you while we're talking.
Yeah.
It's my favorite painting in the book. Here's the place where he shows up and Gilbert says, wait, what's going on?
Yeah. You can really see his, wow.
Painting. I mean, it's hard. It may be hard for people to see it on.
No, I think it's coming out well. Yeah.
But I just love how and when I told Stacy, the illustrator, that how much I love this particular painting, he seemed pretty gratified because he said that was like one of the ones he spent the most time.
Wow.
And I saw various permutations of it. And
really?
But the cool thing is that this ended up being the portrait that's on the dollar bill. And if you look at a fairly newly minted, pretty as clear as you can get dollar bill, and it's in reverse, of course, because it's engraving. But you can actually see the swelling around his mouth.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
I mean, here's the Athenaeum, as it's called. You can see he's sort of, it looks like he's playing a trumpet a little bit.
Yeah.
This is all the back matter. But, and so Gilbert Stuart never finished this painting. And
but the thing about it is, you must be right that he just didn't want to give it to him because there wasn't much left to do.
Right. Well, who knows exactly, but we don't have any
well, where is the painting now? Is it still?
Well, I got a funny story about that. It belongs to the MFA in Boston, Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. It's known as the Athenaeum. That's the original. But Gilbert Stuart, and the difference between a copy and a replica, I learned from Ellen Miles. A copy is a copy of someone else's work. So if I wanted to go to the Met and copy a Monet, that would be a copy.
Okay.
A bad one at that. But if I made a copy of my own painting, that's a replica. And so what Gilbert Stuart did was he painted George's face and shoulders, neck and shoulders, and then he just started cranking out replicas. He kept that one in his studio, and he just started cranking out replicas and selling them.
Yeah.
And I think he called them his $100 bills.
Oh, funny.
So I think he probably did close to 100.
Wow.
And that is why everybody, you see this everywhere in so many state capitals. There's one at the White House. There's this, and people say, well, it's an original. Yes, of course it is, but it's a replica. So I was at the National Portrait Gallery in DC, and I was saying this to these lovely curators because we did this event. It was really fun. We're actually doing another one for President's Day weekend. But I'm mansplaining to them about, everyone says they have the original, but the actual one is at the MFA in Boston. And they had the grace not to contradict me. And then they said, well, should we go upstairs and see some Gilbert Stuarts? And I said, sure. And I felt like I was, in the mixed up files of Mrs. Vasily Franco, clothes. And I got the run of the place. Oh,
that's exciting.
Oh my God, look at that.
Yeah.
We went to the Gilbert Stuarts, and there's the Athenaeum hanging on the wall. And they looked at me and I said, what's it doing here? And it turns out they have shared custody.
Oh, interesting.
So it is currently at the Smithsonian / National.
Ah, wow. Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah. And I don't know when this is going to air, our podcast, but
it's going to be tomorrow.
Well, on February 15th, Stacy, the illustrator, and I are doing an event at the National Portrait Gallery.
Nice.
President's Day.
That's great.
They do a big family fun day.
That must be so much fun.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh man, I feel terrible. I didn't line anything up for President's Day.
Well, they were anyway. They called me. Let's just say that.
No, I think that's great. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, congratulations. That's going to be amazing. Yeah.
Well, and they have this. I'm embarrassed to admit I'd never heard of the Running Presidents. Have you ever heard of the Running Presidents?
No.
Good. okay, but I think a lot of our listeners may. They're these big, they look like human bobbleheads. They're the president. I think they're the ones on Rushmore. I think it's Washington, Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt. Who's the fourth one? I'm going to forget.
I don't know.
Lincoln.
Oh,
Anyway,
that guy.
And they show up at the baseball game, at the Washington Nationals games, and they do like this silly race, but I
they too?
really, really famous. And so
Wow.
one of the running presidents, George, is going to sit and Stacy's going to do his portrait.
Oh, I love that.
Isn't that cool? And
that's the best.
All the kids, and we're all going to be drawing his portraits.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Promoting is hard, right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, it is.
It's hard.
Harder than ever now, I think.
It is.
The implosion of social media.
Because social media is good, but it's bad because everybody's doing it. So like whatever I do it from the heart. I don't do when I promote, I don't do it in a way that feels false to me, because that's what we're creators, and what do we have but our truths. Everything we do is from our hearts. It's the truth, so that's how I view promotions as well. You never know. One kid's whole life could be changed from your book, and isn't that an amazing thing? We are so lucky to be in this field where we can be part of children's lives for the better at a time when things just get worse and worse. But these kids, they have these books and they can see how these people, they had difficulties, they worked it out. Look, Gilbert, Stuart, and Washington hate each other, but it turned out okay. The painting came out, so like, I think that's important, that this too shall pass kind of thing is pretty important. Can you show the picture? Can you show the part when he sees the horse out the window? I like that one.
Oh, yeah. Talk amongst yourselves while we're doing
I like the art on your wall, too.
Well,
I know it's hard to pull it out on command.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. It's a spread, so it's a little hard.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, and look that's an example of the paint. I love how he did that with the showings, how he does the paint on the canvas. Yeah. That's gorgeous.
Yeah, he did.
And that looks so effortless, but it probably took him forever too, because he has to overlay it.
Yeah. And I just love how I think I mentioned this at the beginning, but how he embedded his actual.
Yeah, I love that.
Portraits.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
These are not Gilbert Stuart portraits. These are other portraits.
Right. The other portraits of George. Yeah,
there are other pages.
I'm gonna say, like that one where George's hand is in his pot. I mean, that looks so awkward. I mean, why did he want to be painted like that?
Yeah, well, that it's hard to find. I've actually done quite a bit of research on why gentlemen put their vests.
Oh, okay.
There's like, especially Napoleon, like there's all these conspiracy theories that he had stomach cancer and that he was holding his sore stomach, or that artists got paid extra to do hands, or blah, 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 blah.
Are you kidding? That can't be true, can it?
Oh, yeah. No, that is actually true.
Wow.
I don't know that it's necessarily true in the paintings that we all know.
Wow. Interesting.
I think a lot of dudes just did that. I mean, honestly, pockets were, when did pockets come? Some of them, their pants were way too tight for pockets.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. There's just an awkward picture. I don't think he comes off well in that portrait. I just don't like it.
There's a couple of Charles Wilson Peels where he's got his hand in his...
I don't like that.
Yeah.
Look at me, the critic over here,
You know what you like, right?
I mean, seriously. But I think it's very important for kids to see the real side of these guys. The things that we grew up with made everybody cardboard. And they're not cardboard at all. And I think kids in the end learn, oh, he's just like me. I don't want to get paid. Who wants to sit who wants to do that? They understand the point of view of it too. It's another so important thing. It leads to discussion, and that's really important. So I want to show you the picture of the horse in mine. It's really funny.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, I love it. Look, Washington slams his door because he's putting on the glasses. And look at the horse. It's like, oh.
I love that kind of retro cartoony illustration. Yeah. It reminds Peter Arno from the New Yorker. I don't know.
Yeah. The illustrator, Jen, I had a conversation with her, which was so cool. She said that she was thinking of kind of graphic novel-y also, because she does have the piece. I love the pieces in it. You don't usually see pieces you do see things, but the way she did it was so abstract,
Yeah.
really, she did the book Smelly Kelly, which I love, by Beth Anderson. And I was like, oh my God, that's so fun. I wish I had a fun book. And every time I wish for something, I get it. So I have to start wishing for other things. I can't say I always get what I want, but in terms of my writing, I've been pretty lucky with it. You know, we both have. You really have a lovely career. You do write some fun things. The rubber book is, I mean, who would think you would have a cool, fun book about rubber? I mean, that's pretty shocking.
Can I say the book coming out in March? I actually have one copy of it.
Huh?
It's called Zero, the number that almost wasn't.
Oh my gosh.
And it is the history of zero,
Wow.
which, believe it or not, has a history. I mean, it's weird, the Hindu Arabic number system. Like, why is it called the Hindu Arabic number? Well, because zero was first used as a number in ancient India, and then it traveled the Silk Road to House of Wisdom in Baghdad.
Wow.
So that's why it's called the Hindu Arabic number.
That's so interesting.
And it wasn't embraced by Europeans until really late. I mean, if you think about it, there's no zero in Roman numerals.
Wow, that's true. Yeah. Wow. Very interesting. Yeah. You approach things that, like, it's like, oh yeah, I didn't know that. I wonder, you always come up with really interesting topics. So it's good for you.
Well,
yeah.
So do you.
Well, thank you. Now I'm working on a project that's going to be YA because it's really complex, and I'm writing an outline. This outline is taking, I wrote the introduction, very complex. So like I took forever. Then I'm very negative about myself. This took forever, but then I look at my body of work. I'm like, oh, somehow I managed to get that done. That's pretty cool. You ever look at your books? It's like, oh my gosh, look what I did. That's so cool, Well, before we go, we'll say a little bit. You mentioned the back matter. Back matter is so important because we tell these stories in a brief way. Like we give the essence of the story in the actual story, but then in the back matter, we fill it in with a lot of important details. And I think our Hogan's Creek books are we've become known for the back matter. And you have a timeline in yours. I think it's so interesting how you had the dual heroes, for lack of another word, in the story, and you effortlessly went between them in the story. And you have the timeline of the both of them mixed in the one timeline. I think that's really well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was deliberate for sure. And it's a graded thing, but
it's great. It's great. You really were so effortless with going back and forth, because that's very hard to make that transition when you have two, but you really did. You did a great job. And I also love when he put in the self-portrait of Gilbert, and you said his selfie, and they called it a self-portrait. Like, it was so cute when you did that. And you said photography hadn't been invented yet. It's like, really, I love that, because like it's well done, but it's also important to tell them that, but you did it really. Yeah.
Kids have no context. I mean,
it's so great. I love that. Yeah. It's so limited, their context. But I love the painting of Gilbert in it. That portrait of him says so much about him. So that self-portrait, like you just see his character in that self-portrait. It was really good.
Visual. There it is.
I love that. Yeah. That is evocative,
Very young.
Great.
Too.
Yeah. Yeah. He's so interesting. And you filled in a lot of the blanks about him in the back. He's an interesting guy, like almost a criminal. But it was really fascinating. I think you were great the way you said just enough in the story. And then you taught us so much more about him in the back. I mean, like, teachers could do so much more teaching from that back. So I think it's great. But a really great job. It's and tell Stacy, I don't know, he doesn't know me. I don't know why he would care, but I think his work is phenomenal.
I'll tell him. I'll deliver that message.
Yeah. Maybe one day I like to speak with artists as well. So maybe one day he would do me the honor, because it really would be lovely to hear about his process, because it's so creative. It's so creative and unexpected. It's very unexpected in a world where we don't have much to look forward to. So we get these unexpected, beautiful books. So we're lucky. So I'll let you go. Thank you so much for being with me. And you're always so nice and wonderful to talk to. Whenever I text you, then you text me back, and then I forget to look at it, and I text you back like 2 months later, but that's me.
I did do a little bit of a Keystone Cop scramble. I said, wait, like 10 minutes before, is this audio?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I know.
No, it's okay. We
You look great. You look good too.
Oh, it's more like lighting.
Lighting, yeah.
Inevitably, when you live in New York City, like a siren goes by.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my dog usually comes out and starts barking, but he hasn't. So I tell them, if you're quiet, I'll give you a TREAT. I don't want to say it now, but so it seems to work. So anyway, yeah, this is a very casual thing, as you can tell. This is conversation. I want it to be natural, and it is. And it's been great. Yes.
Well, thank you for having me. It was really fun.
Yes. All right. Thank you guys for coming, and we'll see you again next time.